The road into the Redwoods narrowed the deeper you went, as though the trees themselves leaned in to whisper warnings no one could quite hear. Mist coiled low to the ground, winding through the moss-covered roots and stretching pale tendrils. Across the cracked asphalt, like something alive. Beyond the scattered shafts of pale morning light, forest seemed endless layer upon layer of shadow that held its own cold breath. Detective Clara Hensley slowed her car to a crawl, her eyes moving between the glistening blacktop and the dense wall of trunks, pressing in on both sides. This was the last stretch before the turnoff to the Vancraftoft estate. Though estate was a generous term for the sprawling wooden lodge and its outbuildings tucked somewhere in the heart of the forest. Clara had been out here once before. Years ago, for a charity event hosted by Evelyn Vancraftoft. That night, the house had been warm with light, windows glowing like gold coins in the darkness, music drifting out into the cool air. Now the forest seemed to have taken most of it back, erasing whatever traces of human joy had existed here. The missing persons report had landed on her desk. 3 days earlier, first flagged as a welfare check after neighbors reported not seeing anyone from the Vancraftoft family for over a week. By the time the sheriff's office sent someone to knock, the gates had been left wide open and the front door ajar. Inside, the house had been quiet, too quiet. A raven burst from the undergrowth, black wings flapping so close to Clara's windshield. She swore she felt the rush of air. She blinked hard, refocusing on the road, her tires crunching over stray branches. Something about this place had a way of making you drift, your mind wandering into dark corners before you realized it. She checked her watch. 9:12 a.m., she would meet the forensic team in 18 minutes. But she wanted a few minutes alone at the scene first. The turnoff came without warning, barely visible dirt path, framed by 2 leaning wooden posts. Half frotted and furred with lichen. She turned onto it, her car lurching over deep ruts carved by old rain. The forest closed in even tighter here. Through the gaps between trunks, she caught glimpses of a sprawling, weathered roofline and the ghostly outlines of shuttered windows. The house appeared suddenly, as if summoned a massive timber lodge crouched beneath the towering redwoods. Its wood siding had darkened with age, streaked with years of damp and shaded decay. The wraparound porch sagged in places and the double front doors stood wide open. Yawning into darkness, she cut the engine, letting the silence settle. Even the birds seemed muted here, their distant calls muffled by the weight of the trees. She stepped out, boots sinking slightly into the soft earth, and the first breath she drew tasted faintly metallic. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of wood rot and something faintly sweet cloying, almost floral, but gone sour. The entry hall opened into a grand space, its vaulted ceiling crisscrossed with thick beams. Light filtered through grimy windows, falling in, broken patches on the dust-coated floor. Clara's footsteps echoed. Her eyes were drawn to the large staircase directly ahead. Something about the banister's polished surface was wrong. The handrail gleamed too brightly in spots, as if recently touched. She ran a gloved finger over it, collecting a faint smear of oil. Someone had been here recently. She moved through. The parlor, her flashlight beam cutting across abandoned teacups on a low table. Pale rings of dried liquid marked their surfaces, and one cup lay on its side, a thin crack running down the porcelain. On the mantel, above a cold fireplace, stood a line of framed photographs. Evelyn and her husband Thomas, with their 3 children, Nicholas, 17, Lillian, 15, and Max, 12. In each picture, their eyes seemed fixed on something just past the camera, smiling but never entirely. In the dining room, the long oak tables still bore the remains of a meal plate stacked at one end, silverware scattered. The food itself was gone, but the faint, unpleasant smell of spoiled meat lingered. She noted the overturned chair near the head of the table. Its back splintered where it had hit the floor. Upstairs, the hall was lined with closed doors. She tried the first one, a bedroom belonging to Lillian. Judging by the soft lavender walls and ballet posters curling at the edges, clothes were scattered across the bed as if someone had been packing in a hurry, but the suitcase on the floor stood empty. Clara crouched, running her light under the bed. A stuffed rabbit lay on its side, one ear missing. She reached for it, and a small scrap of paper slid out from beneath the toy. It was a torn page from a spiral notebook. The writing was hurried, jagged. "He's coming back. Don't tell Mom." Her pulse ticked faster. Who was he? She slipped the note into an evidence bag and moved on. The master bedroom was worse. The bed had been stripped, the mattress half pulled from its frame. On the far wall, the windows stood open despite the chill, its curtains swaying. A muddy footprint marked the sill, too large for a child. Outside, a rope ladder dangled into the shadow of the trees below. She leaned out, scanning the ground. The earth was churned, as though someone had landed there heavily. The undergrowth was bent back in a clear path, leading deeper into the forest. Something shifted in the periphery of her visiona, flicker of movement between the trunks. She held still, barely breathing, but the shadows kept their secrets. The sound came then, faint, rhythmic, almost like breathing, but deeper. It pulsed once, twice, and was gone. A sharp creak from behind made her spin, at the end of the hall. One of the closed doors was now slightly ajar. She could have sworn it had been shut when she passed it. Her hand went to her sidearm. She approached slowly, pushing the door open with the toe of her boot. The room beyond was dark, the curtains drawn tight. Her flashlight swept across walls covered in peeling wallpaper and unmade bed, and something on the wall. She stepped closer, frowning. It wasn't wallpaper, peeling it was photographs. Hundreds of them tacked and taped in overlapping layers. Most were Polaroids, their edges curling with age. They were all of the Vancraftoft family. Some showed them at the dinner table, some sleeping in their beds, some in the yard. But many had been taken from outside windows, through gaps in curtains, and in every single one. There was a figure in the background, sometimes reflected in glass, sometimes half hidden behind a tree. The same figure, tall, thin, wearing something. That looked like a hood. Clara's skin prickled. She reached for the closest photograph when her phone buzzed in her pocket, shattering the stillness. It was the forensic team. They'd just arrived at the front gate. She told them to wait. She had to see where that path in the forest led. Clara descended the rope ladder with deliberate, quiet movements, the cold damp of the rope clinging to her gloves. When her boots sank into the loamy forest floor, the temperature seemed to drop another few degrees. The canopy here was thick, sunlight broken into dim, trembling fragments that barely reached the ground. She paused to listen. Nothing. No birdsong. No wind through the needles above. Just her own breath and the faint sound of her boots shifting on the wet soil. She crouched to examine the disturbed ground more closely. Heavy footprints, larger than her own, led away from the house. Each print deep, indicating a person carrying weight or moving quickly. The earth was churned where the figure had landed from the ladder, and the prints led directly into the gloom. Her instincts told her she should wait for the forensic team. But instincts also told her that whatever had happened here was slipping away with every passing second. The rope ladder had been a deliberate choice. It allowed someone to leave without being seen from the main driveway. And if the prints were fresh, she followed. The trail wove between massive trunks, their bark furrowed and slick with moss. Ferns brushed against her knees, and the damp smell of earth and decay clung to her clothes. The further she went, the more the undergrowth seemed to shift subtly, as though the forest was narrowing in behind her. 20 yards in, she saw it, a scrap of fabric pale against the dark soil. She knelt, lifting it with tweezers from her evidence kit. It was the corner of a linen shirt cuff, torn, the stitching expensive and delicate. A single dark smear marred the edge. Blood. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She sealed the scrap in a bag, marking the location, and moved on. The path began to descend, the ground softening underfoot. Soon she realized it wasn't just a trailet. It was an old logging road, long abandoned, reclaimed by roots and creeping vines. A faint smell reached her now. Riding the still air smoke, she slowed, listening. Their faint, deliberate crunches of footsteps ahead, not hurried, but steady. She drew her sidearm, moving silently until the trail bent sharply beyond the bend. An old hunting cabin crouched in the gloom, its roof sagging under years of rain. Thin strands of smoke curled from a rusted stove. Clara eased closer, using the cover of a fallen redwood to shield her approach. The cabin's single window was smeared with grime, but a thin line had been wiped clean across the center, leaving just enough visibility for whoever was inside to watch the path. She crawled low, circling to the back. There was no door here, only a gap in the wall where boards had rotted through. She pressed her ear to the gap, straining a voice. Low male, speaking in short, halting sentences. At first she thought he was on the phone, but there was no answering voice, only silence. Between his words, "I told you not ready yet. She doesn't know." "No, not yet. Soon." Clara's hand tightened on her weapon. A faint creak came from inside, and then the sound of something being set down on wood. Footsteps moving toward the front, she slid back into the trees, keeping low, until she had a view of the cabin's door. It opened. The man who stepped out was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a flannel jacket and dark jeans. His boots were caked with fresh mud, the same depth and pattern as the prints she'd been following. His face was shadowed by the brim of a cap, but she caught the pale glint of eyes scanning the tree line. Then he looked directly toward her. She froze, every muscle tense. The man's expression didn't change. Slowly, he stepped off the porch, heading toward the far side of the clearing, when he vanished into the trees. She let out a slow breath. She could go after him, but she couldn't ignore the cabin. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp wood and stale smoke. A small cast-iron stove glowed faintly in the corner. On the table beside it sat a battered leather satchel, half open. Papers spilled from it, maps, photographs, his handwritten notes in a hurried scrawl. She pulled on a fresh pair of gloves and began examining them. One of the maps was of the Redwood State Forest, marked with red circles in at least 6 locations. The Vancraftoft estate was one of them. Another photograph caught her attention. Leon Vancraftoft, sitting on the porch steps of the lodge, taken from a distance through the trees. The edges were frayed, but a date was written in the corner. 3 days before the family vanished. The notes were worse. They spoke of keeping watch, night visits, and one chilling line underlined twice. "The forest will take them back when it's ready." Clara's stomach knotted. Something scraped faintly outside. She turned toward the sound, and the cabin door swung shut on its own weight, plunging the room into demenace. In the silence that followed, she realized she wasn't alone in here anymore. The shift in air pressure was subtle, but Clara felt it, the almost imperceptible heaviness when another presence shares the space. Her eyes swept the cabin interior, every corner and shadow. The stove's faint glow barely touched the far end of the room, where an alcove was swallowed in darkness. She took a step toward it, the floorboards creaking under her boots. "Sheriff's Department," she called, her voice low but steady. "Step out where I can see you." No answer. Another step. The smell of the place, smoke, mildew, and something faintly sweet, like spoiled fruit, thickened. The alcove's shadow seemed to stretch, as if it were swallowing her light. Her flashlight beam cut through it, revealing a shape of figure, hunched low, knees drawn to chest. "On your feet, hands where I can see them." Figure didn't move. She took one more step, and the beam caught a face. It was a boy, or what was left of one. He couldn't have been more than 16, but his skin was gray with exhaustion, eyes sunken and wild. His wrists were bound with frayed rope, and his clothes were stiff with dirt. He blinked into the light, squinting as though unsure whether she was real. Clara lowered her weapon slightly, but kept her guard up. "I'm here to help." "What's up?" "Your name?" The boy's lips parted. His voice came out as a dry rasp. "Max." Her pulse jumped. Max. The youngest Vancraftoft child was supposed to be 12. This boy looked older, worn by something far harsher than time. She crouched, cutting the rope from his wrists. "Where's your family?" His eyes darted toward the wall behind her, and he began to shake his head violently. The sound came again, the A slow crunch of footsteps outside. Clara stood, pulling Max with her. "Stay behind me." The cabin door swung inward, and the tall man in the flannel stepped inside. His eyes flicked from Clara to the boy, then back to her. No surprise, no alarm, just a slow, almost amused tilt of his head. "You shouldn't be." "Here," he said, his voice low and even. "Detective Clara Hensley, Sheriff's Department." "Step back. Hands where I can see them." He took another step forward instead. Max let out a small, strangled noise. "Don't." The man's smile was thin. "You don't understand. You belong to the forest now." Clara tightened her grip on her weapon. "Last warning." Something changed in his expression, not fear, but a kind of disappointment. Then he moved faster than she expected, lunging not for her, but toward the stove. His boot slammed into its side, sending the iron structure tipping. Embers burst across the floor in a spray of red light. Smoke rising instantly, Clara grabbed Max and pulled him toward the rear wall, where the rotted boards gave way to the outside. She shoved him through the gap, then crawled after, coughing. As smoke swallowed the room, they tumbled into the cold air, rolling down the slope behind the cabin. The forest seemed to close around them immediately, the muffled roar of the growing fire at their backs. "Which way?" she hissed. But Max only shook his head, trembling. "We can't go back there. They'll find us." She took his arm, forcing him to look at her. "Where's your mother, your brother and sister?" Tears welled, but he swallowed them back. "It's not just him, it's the others. The ones in the trees." Branches creaked overhead, though there was no wind. Clara looked up and for a heartbeat. She swore she saw movement high among the branches, tall, thin shapes, perfectly still against the fading light. Then Max wrenched free, bolting into the shadows. She swore under her breath and ran after him, the forest swallowing them both. The air grew colder the deeper they went. Twice she thought she heard whispers, soft, indistinct, threading between the trunks. The path became uneven, roots jutting up like the knuckles of some buried giant dot. Max darted left between two massive redwoods. And suddenly they were in a clearing she hadn't seen on the map. In its center stood something impossible, perfect ring of stones, each taller than a man, their surfaces carved with symbols worn smooth by time. Max froze at the edge, chest heaving. "This is where they come from," he whispered. Clara's flashlight caught on the nearest stone, and for the first time she realized the symbols weren't random. They were faces, dozens of faces, mouths open in silent screams. Behind them, the forest had gone utterly silent again. A voice, low and close to her ears, said, "You shouldn't have followed." Clara spun, flashlight beams slicing through the cold air, but no one stood behind her. The voice had been so close she could almost feel its breath. Yet the clearing was empty, only the ring of stones, Max at the far edge and the dark wall of redwoods pressing in. Her instincts screamed to get out, but Max hadn't moved. He stood transfixed, his gaze locked on the nearest stone. Clara crossed to him, keeping her voice low and steady. "Max, we have to leave. Now." He didn't answer. She followed his stare. The face carved into the stone before him was fresher than the others, its features sharp, unweathered by time, and she recognized them. Evelyn Vancraftoft. The likeness was uncanny, down to the curve of the mouth and the faint tilt of her head. But the mouth here was open too wide, stretched in silent terror. Clara's stomach tightened. "Look at me." Slowly his eyes shifted to her, but they were glassy, as if he were seeing something far away. "They put her here," he whispered. "They put all of them here." A faint vibration shivered through the ground, so subtle Clara first thought it was her pulse. But it grew, a low hum that seemed to come from the stones themselves. Max stepped forward. Clara grabbed his arm, yanking him back just as a shadow detached from the tree line. Tall, impossibly thin, it moved in jerks, like a figure glimpsed between lightning strikes. The hood it wore seemed to swallow its head entirely, but she could feel its attention, sharp and cold as ice water down her spine. It stopped at the edge of the stone ring, as though some unseen barrier held it there. Another shape emerged behind it, then another. They stood in a half circle just beyond the stones, silent and still, their forms blurring at the edges as though the forest itself hadn't decided whether they were real. Max's breathing turned shallow, panicked. We can't let them touch us. Clara pulled him toward the trees opposite the figures, her grip like iron. Run. They plunged into the undergrowth, branches snapping against their arms and legs. The hum faded behind them, placed by the pounding of their own steps. Clara didn't stop until the ground began to rise, the trees thinning slightly. She slowed, listening for pursuit. But the forest had gone dead again. Max collapsed to his knees, gasping. She crouched beside him. Max, you have to tell me everything you know. Right now. Rubbed his wrists where the rope had been, eyes darting toward every shadow. They've been watching us for weeks. Mom said not to tell anyone, said it would make them angry. But they were already angry. They want us for the stones. Clara forced herself to stay calm. Why? What are they? He shook his head hard. Not people. Not anymore. They live in the trees. They come when it's dark. If they touch you, you don't come back the same. Her radio crackled suddenly, the burst of static so loud it made them both flinch. Hensley, do you copy? It was the forensic team. She lifted the radio, pressing the transmit. Go ahead. We found something at the house, the voice said, uneven. You need to see this now. She hesitated, glancing toward the deep forest. I've got Max. He's alive. We're a quarter-mile north of the transmission dissolved into static. Hello? Say again? Nothing but the hiss of dead air. Max was staring at her radio like it was a snake. It's them. They don't want you calling anyone. Her skin prickled. They had to get back to the estate, but the thought of walking through that forest again, with those silent figures somewhere behind, tightened her chest. She helped Max to his feet, and they began moving, keeping to the higher ground where the trees were sparser. The sky above had gone a strange metallic shade of gray, the kind of light that made it impossible to tell how much time had passed. When they finally broke from the tree line, Clara saw the lodge in the distance, but something was wrong. A thin column of smoke rose from its roof, and a single figure stood in the driveway, motionless, facing them. It was the man in the flannel. The man in the flannel didn't move as Clara and Max emerged from the tree line. His stance was loose, almost casual, but his head was tilted just slightly too far, like he was listening to something behind them rather than watching them directly. Smoke drifted lazily from the roof of the lodge, curling into the gray sky. The smell was faintly acrid, not the deep, choking burn of a building fire, more like something smoldering in the walls. Clara's grip on Max's arm tightened as they crossed the open stretch toward the driveway. She kept her free hand close to her weapon. When they were still 20 feet away, the man finally spoke. You brought him back. Clara's voice was steady, measured. Max is coming with me. Where's the rest of the family? The man's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. You're asking the wrong question. What question should I be asking? He turned his head toward the lodge, as if listening again. Whether you can leave before the trees notice you're gone. Clara stepped forward. I'm done with the riddles. But tell me where they are. The man's eyes flicked to Max, and something passed between them, fear on the boy's part, something else on his. Then he said, almost gently, they're inside. But they're not yours to save anymore. Clara's instinct screamed at her to get Max to safety, but she couldn't walk away without knowing. She looked toward the lodge, its dark windows like watching eyes. You stay here, she told Max quietly. If anything happens, run to the road. Don't stop. Max's face tightened. You won't come back if you go in there. She didn't answer. The man stepped aside as she passed, his boots crunching on the gravel. She could feel his gaze on her back. Inside, the air was warmer than before, thick with the smell of scorched wood. The foyer was dim, the light from outside barely reaching past the threshold. She moved down the hall toward the dining room. Rumond froze. The long oak table was set again. Plates gleamed in the faint light, each one piled high with food. Steam curled from a roast at the center, as if it had just come from the oven. Glasses of wine shimmered red in the shadows. and the Vancraftoft family sat around the table, Evelyn at the head, Thomas to her right, Nicholas and Lillian across from each other. They didn't move. Their skin was pale, almost waxen, eyes wide, unblinking. Evelyn, Clara said softly. No response. Then Evelyn's mouth moved. The sound that came out was not a voice. It was the low hum she'd heard in the stone circle, vibrating through the floorboards. Her vision swam for a moment, the edges of the room blurring. She took a step back. Thomas's head turned toward her, slowly, as though his neck had forgotten how to work. His eyes locked on hers, and the hum grew louder. Clara's flashlight beam shook slightly in her grip. What happened to you? Nicholas's lips peeled back from his teeth in something that wasn't a smile. The forest keeps what it takes. His voice was deep, strange, as if layered with something else beneath it. She took another step, back toward the hall. Lillian tilted her head, her hair falling across one eye. You should stay. It's quieter here. The hum deepened, resonating in Clara's bones. She felt her thoughts slipping, an almost pleasant weight pulling at the edges of her mind. Then Max's voice cut through it from the doorway. Don't. Listen. The sound snapped her back. She turned, grabbing his arm. We're leaving. But as they stepped into the foyer, the front door slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls, and from the darkened corners of the room, shapes began to step forward, tall, thin, hooded, the same figures from the forest. They moved between her and the door, silent, the air around them colder than ice. Behind her, the hum swelled again, the sound of the stones, the trees, the earth itself. Max's hand was trembling in hers. They're not going to let us leave. The air thickened, pressing against Clara's skin as if the walls themselves were leaning in. Hooded figures glided closer, their movements soundless, each step deliberate. There was no visible face beneath the shadows of their hoods, only a darkness that seemed deeper than the room itself, absorbing the light. Clara tightened her grip on Max's hand. Stay behind me. Her voice was low, controlled, but the thud of her pulse in her ears was deafening. She took a step toward the nearest figure, weapon raised. Move. It didn't. Instead, the hum shifted, no longer a steady vibration, but a pattern, almost like words in a language her mind couldn't quite catch. It scraped at her thoughts, pulling her toward it. Max stumbled, clutching his head. They're inside my mind, he whispered. Clara fired. The shot cracked through the lodge, echoing in the stillness. The bullet passed clean through the figure, splintering the wood of the wall behind. The shape didn't flinch. Instead, the others began to move faster, closing in. Clara scanned the room. The only other way out was the side hall, leading toward the kitchen. She yanked Max toward it, boots skidding on the dusty floor. The hum followed, growing sharper, more insistent. They burst into the kitchen and froze. Every window was covered. From the outside, not boarded, not curtained, covered, sheets of bark, thick and gnarled, sealed the frames like the trees themselves had grown over them. The light filtering through was dim and green. Max's breathing hitched. It's the forest. It's coming in. A sudden crash behind them made Clara spin. One of the hooded figures stood in the doorway, tilting its head. The air around it shimmered faintly, as if heat rose from its form despite the cold. Clara grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the counter and hurled it. The object passed through the figure, clattering to the floor without slowing it. It stepped closer, and the green light from the windows pulsed in rhythm with the hum she pulled. Max toward the pantry door, slamming it shut behind them. The space was cramped, lined with shelves of dust-coated jars and canned goods. She pressed her ear to the door. The hum was still there, but now it was joined by another sound, whispering dozens of voices, low and overlapping, speaking in that same almost language. Max crouched low, covering his ears. Don't let them touch me, he said again, the words trembling. Clara scanned the shelves. In the far corner, half hidden behind sacks of flour, she saw a narrow door. She pulled it open to find a set of steep stairs descending into darkness. There. It was no time to hesitate. She pushed Max ahead of her, following him down. The air grew colder with each step. The stone walls were damp, and the faint smell of earth and mold clung to everything. At the bottom, her flashlight beam swept across a wide cellar and finished, with a packed dirt floor. The center trapdoor lay open, the black space beneath. Yawning like a second mouth in the earth, carved into the dirt around it, was the same circular pattern she'd seen in the forest stone ring faces. Extorted and screaming, cut into the ground itself, Max stopped short. "No," he whispered. From the darkness of the trapdoor, something stirred. Not a figure, not a person. Something that moved like the forest itself, fruit and shadow. Pulling itself upward, Clara took a step back, but the space around them seemed to shrink. The whispers rose into a single, drawn-out breath, and the cold surged up her spine. Max grabbed her arm, eyes wide with a terror that felt too old for him. "This is where they take us." And then, from somewhere above, the man in the flannel called down, his voice calm, almost conversational. "You've gone too far to walk out now, detective." The man's voice drifted down the narrow stairwell, carried on that same low hum, as though the sound came from the walls themselves. Clara pivoted toward the stairs, weapon raised, but all she saw at the top was a shadow framed by the faint green light from the kitchen. "I told you." His voice was steady. "The forest keeps what it takes." Max backed away from the trap door, pressing himself against the damp cellar wall. "Don't let it touch me," he said again, his voice cracking this time. The thing rising from the trapdoor was no longer only shadow it had formed now. The shape of a torso, but wrong, too long. Arms that stretched until their fingers scraped the dirt floor, splintered and wet, and from beneath it, pale faces pushed outward, like knots in the wood, mouths open and silent. Screams, the hum deepened. Clara's knees almost buckled under the weight of it. She forced her voice through the pressure. Max moved toward the stairs. Now. But the boy's eyes were fixed on one of the faces in the bark, and horror dawned across his expression. "That's Lillian." Clara's gut twisted. She fired at the thing, the gunshot deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet slammed into the bark and split it, but instead of falling, the fragments writhed and rejoined, sealing the wound. The figures had door what passed for it tilted toward her. Something like a breath sighed out from it, damp and cold. Max screamed. The shadow at the top of the stairs shifted, and the man in the flannel began descending, slow and deliberate. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. If you leave the boy, I can still let you walk out of here alive." Clara positioned herself between Max and the man. "That's not happening." He stopped on the last step, his face now visible in the flashlight's edge. His eyes were pale, not the cloudy white of blindness, but the washed-out hue of something long dead in the water. "You think you can take him back to the world?" His tone was almost curious. The moment he stepped into the stones, he was theirs. The thing in the trapdoor shifted again, and its long arms stretched toward Max, claws of root and splinter reaching. Clara fired at the ceiling above the man, showering him with splinters of wood. In the second his head ducked, she grabbed Max, shoving him toward the stairs. They took them two at a time, the hum chasing them upward. They burst into the kitchen, the bark-covered windows now pulsing faintly, as though something alive pressed against them from outside. From the stairwell below came the sound of something heavy pulling itself upward. Clara dragged Max through the hall toward the front of the lodge, praying the door would open. It did, but what lay beyond made her stop cold. The driveway was gone. In its place stretched the forest. Not the forest they had walked through before, but something denser, darker. Trees twisted in shapes that defied their own trunks, roots crossing over one another like a tangle of bones. There was no road, no sky, only the endless canopy closing in. Max's voice was barely a whisper. "We're not in the same place anymore." Behind them, something heavy hit the top of the cellar stairs. Clara took a breath, scanning the distorted forest before them. Somewhere inside, far off, she could hear the hum again. It was coming from more than one direction. The air in the warped forest was thicker, almost damp enough to drink. It clung to Clara's skin, carrying a faint sweetness beneath the rot-like flowers left too long in stagnant water. Every breath felt weighted, Max stayed close, his hand gripping her jacket sleeve so tightly she could feel the tremor in his fingers. The forest ahead shifted subtly with each step, as if the trees themselves leaned aside to let them pass. Behind them, something large moved within the lodge, each impact against the floorboards sending dull vibrations through the earth. "Keep moving," Clara whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was saying it to, Max or herself. The path, if it could be called that, wound through roots as thick as her torso, many of them split open to reveal pale, smooth wood beneath. Marred by shapes that looked disturbingly like human features, mouths, eyes, even the curve of a cheekbone. Some looked eerily familiar. She avoided looking too closely. A sound rose from somewhere ahead. Not the hum this time, but something sharper, like wind rushing through narrow stone canyons. Max stiffened at her side. "They're calling," he said. The trees opened suddenly into another clearing. In its center, a pool of black water lay so still it could have been glass. The surface reflected nothing, not the canopy above, not their own shapes at its edge. On the far side, half submerged in the dark water, stood 3 of the hooded figures. They did not move, but Clara could feel their attention as keenly as if they'd placed a hand on her back. Max's breathing quickened. "If we touch it, we don't come back." Clara scanned the edges of the clearing. There was no way around without stepping into the water. The path behind them was already closing, trees shifting imperceptibly, roots knitting together until there was nothing left but a wall of bark. The hum began again, low and insistent, vibrating in the base of her skull. Max dropped to his knees, clutching his head. "It's too loud." Clara crouched in front of him, gripping his shoulders. "Listen, to me, we get across and we keep moving. Do you understand?" He nodded weakly, and she pulled him to his feet. The water's surface broke as they stepped in. Cold shot up her legs instantly, so deep it felt like knives in her bones. The hooded figures didn't move, but the hum grew louder, resonating through the water itself. Halfway across, Max slipped. Clara caught him under the arms, dragging him upright, but when she looked down, she saw hands beneath the surface. Dozens of them, pale and groping, pushing upward from the black depths. One brushed her ankle. It felt real flesh and bone, not water or shadow. She kicked free, forcing her legs to move faster. The hooded figures parted as they reached the far shore, letting them step onto solid ground. Clara didn't look at them. She kept her eyes ahead, pulling Max until the forest swallowed the pool behind them. For a moment, as the hum faded, they came to a rise, and beyond it, Clara saw light, trio light, gold and thin, filtering through gaps. "In the trees, it's the road," she said, hope flashing sharp in her chest, but Max's grip on her arm tightened painfully. "It's not." They crested the rise, and the road lay before them flat, winding, stretching into the distance. Every few yards, a figure stood in the center of it, all of them facing toward her, all of them hooded. The figures did not move, yet Clara felt the same sickening certainty she had felt in the lodge cellar, that they were not waiting for her to act, but for her to understand something. The gold light on the road didn't come from the sun. There was no warmth in it. It pulsed faintly, as if alive. And with each pulse, the hooded shapes seemed sharper in her vision, their edges more defined. Max pressed against her side, his voice barely more than a tremor. "They're not all strangers." Clara glanced down. But he wouldn't meet her eyes. His gaze was locked on the 3rd figure down the line. She risked a step forward, and the nearest hooded figure shifted. The motion was tiny, more of a lean than a step, but it was enough to break the spell. "Stay behind me," she whispered. The hooded figure's head lifted slightly, and for the first time she saw its face beneath the shadow of the cowl. Wasn't a face. The hollow where its features should have been was filled with twisting root and bark, and within the bark, pale shapes pressed outward, cheeks, foreheads, lips parted as if speaking. One of the faces was moving. Clara realized with a sharp jolt that it was mouthing her name. Behind her, Max's breath hitched. She turned just in. Time to see the forest closing again, the way it had at the pool. The light behind them dimmed until there was only the gold glow from the road ahead. The hooded figure nearest her stepped aside. revealing a gap between itself and the next. Beyond, the road curved, disappearing into what might have been a deeper section of forest or something else entirely. The hum began again, this time lower, slower, and almost. Patient Max pulled at her arm. "We can't stay here." She knew he was right. The only way forward was through, as they passed the first figure. The faces in its bark seemed to strain against the surface, as if desperate to break free. She kept her eyes on the curve of the road, resisting the urge to look back. The further they walked, the taller the trees grew on either side, their trunks smooth and pale, branches arching overhead until the forest became a tunnel. The air was different. Here drier. Almost brittle. The hum faded entirely, replaced by another sound. Footsteps not behind them. In front, they came around the bend, and the road ended abruptly at a wide circle of stones. At its center, lit by that same unnatural gold, stood the man. In the flannel shirt, he smiled, and for the first time, Clara saw a teeth, not normal teeth, but long. Uneven shards like splinters of bone. "I told you," he said, his voice almost gentle. "The forest keeps what it takes." Max froze, and Clara realized the boy was trembling not just with fear, but with recognition. "You know him," she said quietly. Max didn't answer. The man stepped forward, and the trees around the stone circles seemed to lean inward, their branches closing off the sky entirely. "Bring him to the center," the man said, "or neither of you will leave." Clara's first instinct was to refuse, but the weight of the trees pressing in made the word lodge in her throat. The circle of stones pulsed faintly with the same gold light as the road, and each pulse made the air shimmer in a way that made her vision swim. Max's hand was still gripping hers, but it felt weaker now, like his strength was being drawn away by the circle itself. His eyes were fixed on the man in the flannel shirt, and there was something between them, a current of memory or recognition, that Clara couldn't break. "What do you want with him?" she asked, forcing her voice steady. The man tilted his head, bone-shard teeth glinting in the light. "He was always meant to return. He's one of us. The forest remembers its own." Clara glanced around the circle. The stone perimeter was carved with symbols she didn't recognize, spirals, jagged slashes, and shapes like branching roots. Some glistened as if freshly cut, the grooves wet with a dark resinous liquid. Max's lips moved soundlessly. She leaned closer, catching fragments. "Don't let them take me." She turned back to the man. "If I step into that circle, what happens?" "You don't step in," he said. "He does, and then the forest closes. And then you walk away." The unspoken truth in his tone was worse than any threat. If she didn't hand Max over, she wouldn't walk away at all. The hum began again, deep and vibrating in her bones. It didn't come from the trees this time. It came from the stones themselves. The golden light flared brighter, casting the man's face in stark relief behind him. The shadows between the trees shifted, and shapes emerged, hooded figures, dozens of them, lining the outer ring. Every cowl faced inward. Clara gripped Max's shoulders. "Run when I say. Don't stop." Max's eyes widened. "We can't run," she repeated, sharper now. The man's smile widened. "You can't leave." Clara shoved Max backward, away from the circle, and lunged toward the nearest gap in the stone ring. The hum turned into a roar, the hooded figures moving for the first time, stepping forward in unison, their movements unnervingly smooth. She dragged Max between two trees, branches clawing at their clothes. The forest resisted, roots rising from the ground to block their path. She vaulted over one, pulling Max with her. Behind them, the man's voice rose, no longer calm but commanding. "Bring them back." Shapes moved through the trees, faster than human, flanking them. Clara felt a hand brush her shoulder, cold, hard, and splintered like wood. She ducked away, forcing herself forward even as the forest twisted, leading them in circles. Max stumbled, nearly falling. Clara caught him under the arms, and when she looked ahead again there was the lodge. It stood exactly as it had when They first found it, dark windows watching, door yawning open. No, she whispered. The hum was here too, inside the lodge. Pulsing in time with the beating of her own heart. Max looked up at her, tears streaking his dirt-smeared face. If we go in, we don't come back. The sound behind them grew louder footsteps, branches snapping, voices whispering their names. Claire's choice was between the thing she already feared and the thing she didn't yet understand. She tightened her grip on Max's hand and stepped through the lodge door.